Greetings, everyone. Mario Blandini here. I'm founder of Resolve Networks and the host of the Comeback Podcast, where we explore hopeful thoughts and perspectives on the good deeds of people. My mission's simple. It's to prove that good's more than charity, because when we're united by a common purpose, I believe it's everyday people that are going to play the decisive difference, because we're stronger together, and that's how we're going to get to a greater good. And my hope is that the good deeds that y'all do yourself as volunteers will play a part in you yourself reaching your highest potential. And part of my reaching my highest potential is getting to meet wonderful people who I want to grow up and be like one day. And one of those is Mr. Robert Riggs, a Peabody Award-winning journalist and a Texas son. Good morning, Robert. How are you?
Well, thank you, and welcome to Texas.
I think the stork dropped me off. It said Frisco, but at the time when I was born, there was only 11,000 people there, so they took me to San Francisco instead.
So do you have your Stetson and boots yet?
I do indeed have boots, and I do have a Stetson, but I have fedoras. I have all kinds of hats. I think what I love most about Texas is freedom, and I think that that's something we're going to talk about, because we're free to actually believe whatever we want and do whatever we want, and I'm hoping people like to do good deeds, and you've seen a lot of those over the years, sir. But let's talk about growing up in Texas. I don't know what that's like. What was it like for you growing up in Texas? Because it was certainly different back then.
I grew up in small town Texas, Paris, Texas, in Lamar County, northeast of Dallas, about a 90-minute drive up on the Red River. And it was really stereotypical of what you would see in many small towns all across the Texas. You had a town square, and usually in the center of that town square was the courthouse, or in our case, a beautiful fountain. And around the square were merchants. And in Paris, you could walk around the square, and every merchant was a World War II veteran.
Wow.
Yeah. So I've taken my children back, and unfortunately and sadly, the town square now is junk stores and antique stores and all. And there's a mall, but there's the Super Walmart.
Right.
And so I've walked my children through the Super Walmart and said, okay, see the sporting goods department? Well, that used to be Williams Sporting Goods on the town square. And you see the fishings. Well, that was the fishing. And you could go that. And I said, and here's the difference. I said, my sense is that all that money goes to Bentonville, Arkansas. And back in this, and when we were here, it went to middle-class families. But more importantly, all these businesses gave.
Of course.
They gave to the high school. They gave to the charities. And I think a lot of that money leaves town. You know?
Well, leaving town is, I think, what a lot of people do. I relocated to here, but I did so because I found Texas to be a hopeful place. So are you hopeful? I'd like to ask every guest that.
Oh, sure. I couldn't get out of bed in the morning if I wasn't hopeful. You know, some days I'm less hopeful or more hopeful.
And coronavirus doesn't help.
Yeah. No. I do have concerns about the future of the country. I think because in reporting and then professionally, I had a national security background, and I'm concerned about the threats and challenges that we face. The country's divided. We've turned, many of us turned on each other, and I think there's this philosophy or way of thinking that's being preached at universities and other places that America is rooted in bad
stuff. My daughter's a freshman in college, and she's had 4 years in high school of just basically saying that American institutions are bad, even like the nuclear family. Again, education is one of those things, and I think people are seeing those pressures, but it's also from media too, social media, and what people choose to watch. Well, they used to watch you on the news back when the news got reported, right?
Yeah, but you believe in redemption.
I do myself, yes.
Yeah. So, the really bad thing about small town Paris, it was a segregated society. And as a child, I can distinctly remember water fountains that said colored and white and all. But you find that today, we've had an African-American president, we left, there's a lot of us that left that behind us and everything. So I don't know of another country that redeems itself like we do. It doesn't happen in Russia. It doesn't happen in China. It doesn't happen in Iraq. And
the quality of life we have is incredible. I think the average king has fewer creature comforts than virtually anybody on the planet today who lives in a great society like ours, where we have access to abundant high-speed internet, abundant food, and abundant entertainment.
Yeah, but I think where the rub starts is that people get on social media, and it's all fake as far as, I mean, I've worked in that world a long time, and they start comparing themselves of, well, I don't go to those places, or I don't have those clothes, and then they, start thinking that maybe it's not as good, and all, without thinking about the freedom they have that that they can actually look at that device, and it's not being monitored as it is in China or somewhere.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so I've had the fortune of traveling to 44 countries, and people say, "What's your favorite country?" It's an easy answer: the United States of America. There is no country better than this, and I have a lot of fondness for other places. But I think it's that freedom, and what called me to be a Texan was the freedom. And I think that's why I'm here talking with you today. And I have my own comeback story. What's your comeback story? Because if did you imagine yourself being a young man from Paris, Texas, covering Watergate, covering wars, covering all the stories you did over the years? Was that always part of your dream? And when did you kind of figure out what your highest potential was?
Well, it wasn't at all. I knew that there was this world out there that I wanted to see and go to. I grew up, small child, fascinated with flight. I wanted to fly. I wanted to fly in the military. But life has a way of, things, there are setbacks. And, many people have looked at all the journalism awards I've received, and they think I've led this charmed existence.
Are you kidding? It's been full of comebacks, right?
Yeah. So my most recent comeback story goes back to the recession in 2008. I was working for CBS, and I was cut with part of my team, but there were hundreds cut that day. But in my case, I'd been doing a big corruption series about UT Southwestern Medical Center here. And they were pounding on CBS. They were cutting ads and everything else, and they had wealthy donors complain to shut it down.
Because you were doing honest reporting.
It was honest reporting. It was all truthful. Misappropriation of funds, and it was later validated. But I was doing that. I was doing terrorism. I'd been to London doing terrorism, and CBS did not like that. They wanted happy news. They wanted, one executive said, we need to take the T word out of your stories. Terrorism. And then I was doing government corruption. And so these things were all controversial.
Of course.
Yeah, and expensive. And so I thought for a year, someday it's coming. And there was an executive walked in from New York and said, I'd like to talk to you up front. And the executive producer waves me over to his office. He says, hey, what's that about? I said, hey, I'm about to get terminated, and you're next. And the color went out of his face.
Of course.
And then the dominoes just started falling across the country. So suddenly I have one kid in college, one on the way, had lived too big, big mortgage, big home. The recession, I'd already lost about $500,000 in value in the home. I lived in Highland Park, the big,
nice neighborhood, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah. Spending is my wife. She looks at our life as TV money and post TV money. Yeah.
And one smaller than the other.
Yeah, but suddenly I can't pay the mortgage. Yeah. I mean, I've got to get out of this thing. And so fortunately, but we barely get out of it. There's no jobs in television. I'm older, and nobody wants somebody older. No one wants the trouble I'm going to bring to their door.
That's right.
Because what was happening across the country, the big networks were spiking investigative stories. They did not want to offend advertisers. That's a sad chapter in our country. And I had a very successful blog at CBS. They hated it. They didn't even understand it. But it was on terrorism. And after I came back from being embedded in Iraq, my producer and I started it. And we were looking at domestic ties to other things happening. And as I said, we went overseas doing reporting. But we started this blog. And in those days, like the CBS station group, they didn't even really understand their own websites. And they would give away ads to like car dealers just as kind of a extra little benefit, didn't understand. Well, I started studying, and I had taught myself a little SEO, search engine optimization, which really is how do you get Google to love you? To come
Indeed,
up with
it's a marketer's the bane of their existence because they change the rules all the time.
So I'm talking 2004. I actually went to Google.
Oh wow!
And said, hey, this website's getting indexed. Would you start indexing? That's what I'm going to do. And so that terrorism blog, it took off. I mean, I had people following it, the post and the stories from all over the world. I remember looking in the intelligence service in India was following it.
That's
that sort
cool.
of stuff. And then suddenly, boom, gone. It's gone. But I did say, I've always been a geek at heart. Always, whether it was my dad and I tampering with motorcycles and engines and
putting little radios together and all that
the whole
stuff.
Deal. All throughout my childhood, I had a Rector set. You're on, So I said, look, the audience is going to the internet. I'm going there with them. And I hung out a shingle and said to business and saying, hey, I can help you understand how to do business online. And it was tough. I'd been in I'd worked in government and I'd been in the belly of the big media beast where, they take care of everything, pay everything. My dad had been a small businessman, but I didn't know I knew nothing about running a business. And so suddenly I've got to learn, I've got to teach myself. I went back to school at UTD, University of Texas, Dallas here in an entrepreneurship program where you'd go once a week for a full day and you end up with a certificate just to start. How do I learn this? And we're scraping. I mean, we're on the verge of bankruptcy. I mean, we're scraping. We have downsized and it's tough, and you're trying to learn, and then you've got to try. Got kids in college, and now you're having to burn up savings. And but that comeback has finally, in that journey, I like to say that I got a PhD in digital media.
Yes, a working man's PhD.
Yes, yeah, and also business. Mm-hmm. And along the way, I made the one great thing about that industry at that time is everybody shared, everybody talked, everybody helped. And so when I saw the podcasting come about, I went, oh, now could be a great storytelling method, a way to do it. I used to say in television, like when we were in Iraq, my crew and I, we carried around a 500-pound pencil, take notes, all that gear and everything. Well, so suddenly now it's like we're here today. You just come in with a microphone and talk. Mm-hmm. And I always knew people were more forthcoming if you could talk to them at their kitchen table. And I thought, so I really began studying. Now, and by the way, along the way, my wife and I had a digital failure. We're horse people. She's a horsewoman. We were Amazon dealers at one point for equine products that she was creating. But we had tried a website community, and we jumped in with passion, but with no business plan and no understanding and all that. It didn't work. But you learn from that school of hard knocks. So
pain is weakness leaving the body, as we were told in the Marine Corps.
Yes, what a great expression. Yeah. Oh yeah. But you are tempered by fire.
That's right.
You really are. I mean, it feels, boy, it hurts at the time, and because you're just, you're getting up wondering where's money coming from today. That's the respect I have for small business people. They go to bed thinking, what are we going to be doing in the business tomorrow to make money? And they get up and they're thinking about, what are we going to do to make money? What did we?
I know. Yeah. It's really, really tough. And I think that's one of my journeys here as part of my comeback is to create a podcast.
Yes.
In addition to the venture that I have, because I think podcast is the new blogging in the sense that this idea of radio, and I grew up on radio. You're more of a TV guy, but I've listened to your podcast.
I grew up on radio.
Yeah, of course you grew up on it. But
Small
for me,
town, yes.
Yeah, and so for me, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, so I had a big abundance of different radio to listen to.
Yes.
And so for me, the idea that the spoken word podcast may be the new blog, in the sense that anybody could write your blog, but very few people can impersonate your voice.
Right.
So it's really the most direct way we as humans can tell a story. And I'm a little bit behind you by several episodes, a couple dozen, but truecrimereporter.com, thetruecrimereporter.com is your latest venture.
Yes, and the way that came about is that back when I was in Washington, first I was worked in Congress, then got into television, was in New York, then eventually came to Dallas.
Where you're a movie star, right? People recognize you.
It's not what it's cracked up to be. You better behave yourself.
I know. I better not get famous, or else I'll have to deal with you had to do.
So we've always been struck. We would be overseas, either reporting or with the family, because I really did take this thing. I started taking our kids overseas in like fifth grade. Like, you've got to understand other cultures. And invariably, it would happen multiple times. You'd hear, "Is that Robert Riggs? I recognized your voice." I heard a distinctive voice. You can't hear yourself. So yeah, you better be careful about how you behave.
I've been fortunate. Yeah. I did a lot of speaking at large conferences, and I've had people say, "Were you that guy, crazy loud guy who talked in India back in?" And like, yeah, that was me. Like, and I've had those fun experiences too. I got to admit, I'm passionate though about our country. Not that my idea about good deeds helping the world couldn't help the whole world, but if we're going to do it anywhere, I think we should do it here. Why? Because we have the most freedom to choose to do whatever the heck we want.
Sure.
That's something that I think people rarely realize. I have a bumper sticker that says freedom is not free. And in California, they might say, "Oh, that's one of those gun-loving people." I do have weapons. I know how to fire them. I was 6 years in the Marine Corps. I'm competent at it. I hope I never shoot one of my weapons ever. Literally, nobody who goes to war wants to shoot their weapons. We're there. The whole goal of this is to not use them, right? And so for me, I'm hopeful, and I think the freedom here is something that it's not lost in America, at least in Texas. And I'm hoping that it comes back everywhere, because isn't the way we choose to think in a hopeful way exclusively our choice?
Sure. Well, I came back to Texas. I was in Washington a number of years as a correspondent, and I covered the Reagan White House, the beginning of George H.W. Bush, presidential campaigns, Congress, the Pentagon, you name it, everything. Covered Gulf War I. But I came back here, and I was burned out.
I bet.
Because it's grueling, and especially in those days. There's a lot of digital help now.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, when you actually had film, life was a lot harder.
Yeah, well, it was videotape cassettes, and yeah. So
analog media.
So I came back to the Austin Bureau, and I thought, it's laid back, and cover the legislature. You can wear jeans and cowboy boots and a sport coat. It's great. But I get back, and everywhere you turn, there's news stories about awful crimes being committed everywhere. And this is what starts the True Crime Reporter podcast. I've gone back to this time, and what we found at that time, the tagline on everything is it was a parolee. They were out on parole, and it was over and over and over. And I'm talking about, women being grabbed by the hair, stopped at the stoplight, dragged out of the car, and shot in their car taken. I mean, stuff beyond pale. It's just horrific things.
Brutal crimes.
Brutal. And I started a conversation with Senator Ted Lyon. Ted is an attorney in Mesquite, was then, and he was the chairman of the Senate Criminal Justice Committee. And the great thing about the Texas legislature, and it may be the only one this way, is that press is on the floor with the members in the House and Senate. There's a brass rail. So you can talk. And we would talk about, "Hey, Senator, what is going on here?" Because at first I thought, well, there's an old adage in news that if it bleeds, it leads, But listen, it was leading and bleeding everywhere. And even in my own station, which really had high standards, like, we're not doing that stuff, but you could not ignore it. We started this conversation about why, what's happening here. And long story short, discovered that in order to relieve prison overcrowding, the administration there, and the fault falls to both parties from the past, they were releasing 150 inmates a day on parole to relieve crowding because the federal courts were on them. And they didn't tell anyone. They didn't want the embarrassment of the prison system being shut down.
Of course.
And so what had happened, and later one of the parole board members said, Senator, we got to the bottom of the barrel. We were scraping the bottom of the barrel. And then what the senator found out was that they'd let out, at that time, 65 former death row inmates. Death row inmates.
Yeah, you didn't get there for no reason.
Yeah. Their sentences had been commuted to life in 1972 in Furman v. Georgia when the death penalty was struck down, and they were eligible for parole. But who would ever imagine anyone in their right mind would let these people out? And the senator discovers this. He calls me to his office. He's shaking in anger because one of the people on there was named Leonardo Lopez, and he and an accomplice had taken hostage 5 deputies here in Dallas who were trying to serve drug warrants, took them to the Trinity River bottoms, downtown Dallas, at night, and executed them. 3 were dead, 1 gravely wounded, 1 escaped, jumped in the river. And it set off the biggest manhunt in Texas since Bonnie and Clyde. And it turned out that the senator back at that time had been a police officer. And he was going to night school for law, and he served warrants with one of these officers. And now, these years later, he's like, how can this happen? I did the story, and in the story, I put in some others that were local. You were looking for a local angle, one of which was a serial killer named Kenneth McDuff, who had murdered 3 teenagers in Fort Worth, and he's out. And so that story just caused a firestorm. But you know what was macabre in this is that as they're having hearings about that, McDuff is cruising a few blocks from the Capitol looking for young women to abduct, and does.
Oh, wow.
So I got on the trail of Kenneth McDuff, stories going on, and found out there was a young, aggressive United States attorney. I mean, you talk about just believed in justice, and 2 U.S. Marshals had started looking at the abduction of a young woman in Waco, Texas, from a convenience store. And the Marshals actually had history, McDuff, from their childhood. Their dad was a Marshal. Their family had been Marshals in Texas going back to Roosevelt in like the turn of the century. And so they learned McDuff was out of prison on parole, and they knew about his earlier, and they just couldn't believe it. An FBI agent comes in and is walking by them at the courthouse, these 3 men, and says, hey, you ever hear of Kenneth McDuff? And they all stop, literally dead in their tracks.
Sure.
And they turn and, yeah, why? Well, we found his car kind of abandoned near where this woman was abducted. And the marshal goes, oh my God, we got Jack Ripper on the loose. No one would investigate. Well, there's not, we don't really have anything tying him to her and all of this, and we don't have calls, and the FBI didn't. And these 2 marshals and this U.S. attorney, Bill Johnston, they went, oh, we're digging in. And it was a Texas spirit too, on all of them. It was like, some people call them the last posse in Texas. And they got on that trail, and then at the same time, parallel, without even knowing them, I'm investigating, how did McDuff get out of prison? How did this happen? How these other people? And I'm starting to dig. And we cross paths, and I find that corruption is involved, and people have been paying bribes in Texas.
My gosh.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And this is supposed to be the stuff that news reports, right? Does the press exist not to uncover and present this type of stuff to Americans? That's what I think their role is.
Oh, exactly. So our paths crossed because after one of the stories aired, a truck stop waitress in Waco called me and he said, Mr. Riggs, I saw the man who murdered my daughter on your TV show. I went, you mean Leonardo Lopez? I'm thinking, oh no, that other guy you talked about, Kenneth McDuff. I got the crew and we hightailed it to Waco. And we find out that unfortunately, her daughter was a sex worker, was on drugs, and there was an area where prostitutes hung out, and she had found out that McDuff had, she had a lot of witnesses. He had abducted her, and they'd never seen her again. But no one, the local police, no one would look at it because
crazy.
Sex workers were expendable. They were less than human. Now, interestingly, when the U.S. Marshals came on the scene, and eventually one of the top marshals in the country came here to lead the manhunt for McDuff, he said, you know what? We look at the public, you're sheep, and we're the sheepdogs. And I don't care what your background is.
That's right.
She was someone's daughter, and we're going to find who did this. And it was that sort of Texas spirit of the marshals of we're going to bring them to justice. But so we cross paths and we all become acquainted, and then I become familiar with their manhunt and everything else. I'm doing the corruption side of it. And then I'll never forget, no one was, I'm doing story after story on it, and the Associated Press is not picking up. Nobody's picking the story up. Even at that time, our parent company on the Dallas Morning News, they're not doing it.
Interesting.
And I got summoned to Dallas by the executives who said, Robert, we're worried. You're saying people are crooks and everything else, and no one is picking it up. Nobody is picking up. Actually, reporters in the Capitol were enamored with the parole board chairman, a big politician, and they were saying to me, hey, you're kind of a newcomer here. You got it wrong. This is a nice guy and all of this. This guy had a secret life. And they said, are you sure you're right? And I said, I am right. I'm right. And they supported me. They said,
good.
Do
well,
it.
And it starts with the conviction to know you're right.
Yeah, but I will tell you, that story and that kind of support would not exist in any newsroom today. It's gone. It is gone. It's all about money. It's all about
profit motive.
Quick profit.
Yeah.
And they've lost a commitment to community.
Well, I'd say they lost a commitment to their purpose. Doesn't the press exist for the express purpose of delivering information in an unbiased way so that we humans can make choices? That's what I was always taught. Yeah. But you're right. And coming from Silicon Valley, a lot of the, let's just say, disruption in that industry has come through digitization.
Yes.
Clearly, there used to be beat reporters at every local paper covering stories. Those humans don't exist anymore, do they?
No. But there was kind of a really pivotal moment of McDuff is captured after a nationwide manhunt. This was after a couple of months, and suddenly he's become big news, nationwide manhunt, and he's brought back to Waco, to the federal courthouse downtown, and a massive mob has gathered, and relatives of this little girl who was abducted, she was pregnant, mother of 2 children, they're all there, and her sisters and cousins are there. And when they bring him out in shackles, the crowd goes crazy. And I thought, oh my God, they're going to kill him. It's going to happen to the screaming and the yelling and all. So afterwards, and I'd done my television reports, the marshals called me, sit somebody down and said, the marshals want to talk to you upstairs. And I didn't really know them yet. And Parnell McNamara, who's now the sheriff of McLennan County, is sitting there. They've all got their cowboy hats on. But it's packed. And you would have thought there was a celebration. It's somber. There's not there. It's a somber mood. And I'm like, what's this? And he says, Robert, I'm going to show you something here. I'm not supposed to show you. I'm not going to give you a copy, but you have to read this. And he opens a drawer and he pulls out and he slaps down this multi-page confession by McDuff's accomplice in the abduction and murder of a young accountant in Austin, Texas. And it was the most, I'd been to wars and stuff. It was the most horrific thing I'd ever read. McDuff was a sadistic sexual serial killer. That's the FBI classification. And it's that sadistic. And I'm like...
And got out on parole and was allowed to walk the streets.
I'm reading this, and you know that at some point this woman had to be begging, I just want to die. God, take me. Because it's so awful. And I'm reading this, and I look up, and big Marshal Parnell McNamara. I mean, if you thought of in your mind, what does a U.S. Marshal Matt Dillon look like? That's
the
Parnell
archetype for what that is.
He's kind of teared up.
Oh, okay.
And I look up and I hand it back over. I'm speechless. And he goes, Robert, we caught him. We did our job. Now, God damn it, go do your job. And I'm like, well, Parnell, not Parnell, Marshall, I'm on it. I'm already on it. But after I read that, I was like, yeah, I mean, I went night and day. My wife describes that period as she was a widow with 2 young children.
Right, because you were dedicated to your work at the time. It was
and
just all consuming.
That is what True Crime Reporter's first season is about. It's a 15-part episode about how did this happen, his capture, the corruption. What are the lessons of history that we should not be repeating?
Yeah, I've enjoyed that from that episode. You're right, and that's one of the things I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Heck, if we only knew, I think history has a lot to teach us, and history that goes back thousands of years.
Sure,
we've been around for. I mean, whether you're a Darwinist or you're someone who believes in a higher creator, we've been around for a while.
Yeah, but our human nature doesn't change.
No, it does not, and I do believe that there is always evil, and there will always be some number of people, but that can't allow us to then think of the glass as half full. My wife. God bless her, I love her, but we're perfect together because I'm a glass is half full guy and she's a glass is half empty woman. And she just thinks of it that way. And I think that in America, we think too much the glass is half empty when we have an abundance of freedom here that is really rare.
Well, and I said back in my reporting then, I say it now, and I'll get pushback from academics and stuff like, because I will say he was the personification of evil. And I've even said, he was Old Testament evil.
Yeah.
And
diabolical.
It just had to be something mistreated by a school teacher or something like that. But when you look at the life and the family, you can just see this monster being created. I just think there's a lot of lessons for policymakers here. Especially to things going on today, like the lenient bail that's going on.
Oh yeah. Well, and they just in Orange County alone, in California, where I'm from, they're going to release 50% of the population of the of the inmates because of Corona. And I'm thinking, gosh, figure there's got to be a better way we can deal with pandemics, because the answer can't be go and put criminals back on the street. Now, am I gonna vote for people who don't want that? Heck yes. Most of these things go without a vote, though, and I think that's the biggest freedom about moving there. I left California because things don't go up on the ballot. Like voting for a sanctuary city, I'm as progressive as you could get. Yet I still think that if you're going to say that we're a sanctuary city, we're not going to prosecute any crimes, shouldn't the citizens vote for that?
Yes.
They say, oh no, well, you elected us and we get to pick. It's like, no, we didn't elect you. You literally got elected in a landslide because you can't have another opinion. But if you put that up for a vote, watch it fail.
Yeah.
And I think it's that freedom thing that here, it wouldn't happen in Texas, right?
So this is our first season of True Crime Reporter. We've got more coming. My wife is an executive producer, and she is saying, because we've had some women say, I started listening to the confession, and I couldn't go to sleep.
Wow, that's
Stuff
powerful.
like that. But she's like, we got to tone it down. So we're working on the second season right now. It'll come out in January, and it's about notorious prison escapes and fugitives in Texas.
Oh.
And we talk to the fugitive hunters who found them and how they found them.
Wow, that's going to be fun.
And then we have many, many more coming. One of the things that's happened, I always, first off, this reporting started in 1990 when I got here and went through 1998. And then it evolved into terrorism reporting. This is before 9/11. And so it's been quite a journey. So I'm just going. As I say in the podcast, my parents were hoarders from the Depression, so I've always hoarded reporters' notebooks. Mm-hmm. And so I've dusted off my reporters' notebooks. My law enforcement sources have brought their confidential case files. We sat down to talk, and you can listen into our journey into darkness.
Because I know, it's cool.
They're all retired, and they can talk now. you know. And even in the McDuff case, I thought I knew everything there was to know about the manhunt and how they got him to reveal locations of some of the bodies. But no, I'll sit down and like, wow. And then they've learned new things from me about the corruption.
Yeah.
And as a result of kind of coming back and doing that series, I reconnected with the former U.S. attorney who was, I mean, if he hadn't taken up the charge, I don't know how many women would be dead.
I know, it's terrible to think.
But he did, I mean, and believe me, his bosses didn't like it. He was out at night, in the dead of night, on the hunt. Not supposed to be, but with the marshals and with SWAT teams. And by day, trying cases and not getting any sleep, sleeping on the floor of his office, catnapping and stuff. But determined. Well, we reconnected, and now we have started a second podcast called Justice Facts, which is really a takeoff on Just the Facts, ma'am. So I bring to the table true crime cases from my career. He brings them from his career, and we kind of meet.
Oh, that's really cool.
And so we're doing, they're kind of one-ofs. True Crime Reporter is a storytelling. I weave a story, and I interview all, unlike most true crime podcasts, you're going to hear it from the detectives, the investigators. Then Bill and I kind of tell our stories together. He pulls stuff out of me, out of him. We've got one up really popular now called Murder, Mayhem, and Methamphetamines, the real Breaking Bad story in Texas.
Oh, that's a good line. It's a good headline, that's for sure.
And then we've got a series going on why husbands think they can get away with murdering their wives. And so we've both had very.
Oh, wow.
So you hear I'm telling you, many of these cases have never been in the newspaper and stuff. And we've come together. My wife saw it when she just saw us together, and she heard when I was interviewing. She says, "You two, you really like each other. Yeah. You got chemistry, and you need to do something together." And that's how that started. And so we're having a lot of fun. We are on the trail of information that kind of both of us have crossed in our careers, but it's kind of put it together, that may even bring new light into the bombing of Pan Am 103 over Lockerbie at Christmas 1987, with Texas ties to arms brokers.
So coming in 2021.
Yes.
To the podcast.
Yeah. And now there's a third podcast.
Oh, wow. I mean, just can't get. So I got to ask you, how is it that I grow up and be like you? What advice would you have for me for some middle-aged guy who has had his own comeback story, not unlike yours, tightening the belt as tight as it goes, but going to do something, at least in my case, I just want to bring stories of good deeds that are hopeful to folks. And so I thank you for being on this. If you were to give me advice today, Robert, what would it be?
Honesty. You're only as good as your word and your handshake. I think that's gone. I mean,
we can bring
such
it back.
a low
I want
level of
to bring it
trust.
back. But you're right. That's one of those things that we should expect.
Perseverance.
Amen.
President Lyndon Johnson, and I worked for a member that was long-time close friends of his. He talked about a can-do spirit. Don't come to the table with any negative. It's about how are we going to do this? Can-do spirit.
Absolutely.
And I've always felt there was something Texas about that. And I want to tell you, I've been in the Valley many times in my career, even when I worked in Congress. I've been in the Valley of Darkness. You see me on television, you don't think that, but there've been hard times, and the people they're going to be a lot of arrows shot at you doing investigative reporting, kill the messenger and other stuff, but just like what happened to me in 2008. And you better believe in a higher power.
That's right.
And you better have good friends and mentors. If there's anything I preach, I speak to college students, the entrepreneurs class at Texas A&M. I start off every semester for them there, and I preach mentorship. You find a mentor.
That's great advice.
I think it's just key. And I have a circle of friends here that are mentors as well. I think we all mentor each other. one sent a message out, said, well, we need to have an FOR dinner. And my friends and I get it, and we're looking at it, and I'm talking to my closest friend, A&M, and I went, is that a military acronym? Did you ever see anything like this in a cadet? FOR. We're racking our brains. We're looking, what is he talking about?
I have an idea.
Okay.
Friends of Robert.
That's it. We racked our brains, you know. And then one of my buddies goes, it's friends. Everybody calls me Riggs. All my friends.
Still starts with an R.
Yeah.
Friends
of Riggs. Yeah. Yeah.
Friends
so
of Riggs.
Listen, and I saw that with, it was something I learned from my father as well. He carried a card. On the back of his business card was a poem about the importance of friendships.
You're right. It's very important.
So, yeah, it's just so important. Yeah, listen, this pandemic has been tough, but just being able to go eat outdoors and have lunch with some friends, when we talk on the phone every day, not texting, on the phone.
You mean there's a device where you can use your voice to talk to somebody else who's not next to you?
Yeah.
What is this device?
Yes. So, yeah.
All right. Well, that's great advice for me. I had a chance to be a guest lecturer at the San Francisco State University in California. I'm going to be a guest lecturer in entrepreneurship at UNT coming in the spring. So I am a big believer. And you got a chance to see Mark Millay and I on my episode 1, which he's a Navy pilot, and he now is helping other veterans with this peer networking. Like, entrepreneurs just support each other. Like, I'm a marketing guy. I can help in 5 minutes someone build an email marketing campaign, and they in 5 minutes can give me feedback on my product. We exchange no dollars, yet both of our companies are going faster.
Yes.
I think there's a recipe there to be replicated.
I think all of you veterans have something special to share with the rest of the country. They haven't served, they haven't worn the uniform. I didn't wear the uniform, but I spent, as an embedded reporter and then working in Congress and going to
Yes, you heard lots of explosions nearby and small arms fire, right? I never experienced that. The only small arms fire I had was going down range. I never had any coming back at me. So, so you could say you've served in a hostile environment more than I have. But going back to those ideas of the values of maybe how we started this, having a purpose. And if all we do is think about profit, then maybe media is not going to be very good. Maybe if we think about as a nonprofit ecosystem, if the only thing we worry about is how much money we're going to make, why aren't we worrying about how much impact we're making, and the money will reward the impact we're making? Yeah. I think there's a lot of ways we can just change the way we think, taking gravity away from profit and bringing it toward purpose. And that's what I'm hoping to do with these thoughtful hopes and perspectives of good deeds.
Well, going through Texas A&M, which,
it's the sixth military academy.
Yes. We turned out more commissioned officers in World War II than all the academies combined. Right. Patton, who my uncle served under, had this famous, what was that experience? He said, if I want to win a battle, give me somebody from an academy. If I want to win a war, give me a Texas Aggie.
All right. There's nothing like that. And with that, that's probably the best way to wrap up our time today.
Thank you.
Robert, it was so great to meet you, right? So hopefully you've given me inspiration to be a podcaster. I think that any time in your life you can change what you're doing. I used to market high-tech products for a living, and sure, I made a lot of companies a lot of money, but it really wasn't my passion. And so I could tell you've had a chance to work in your passion. It's not easy. The belt gets tightened and loosened from time to time.
Well, in the podcast, I'm really back to my passion. I always loved reporting and telling stories, and consulting. I look back at it. I realized that at one point, this is not really me. I'm good at what I do, but no, I'm back to the passion. But we're talking about a 10-year comeback story there.
Oh, it's amazing. And if you want to get your own comeback story, folks, go listen to Robert's great stuff, or Riggs, as he's allowed me to call you now, right?
And hey, become an FOR.
That's right, a friend of Riggs. By downloading his podcast, go to all the usual places. It's everywhere, right? Basically everywhere you can see podcasts. TheTrueCrimeReporter.com is the website. Fantastic stuff. And what I like about it is it's a good conversation. It's good for leaving on all day. Whereas you could do your other work and listen to it in the background. My podcast, I'm too zany and maybe too much energy. But I love yours because it's that perfect thing you can keep on the background.
Well, I loved yours in the sense of I like the values and the discipline, what you talk about, especially with the Top Gun.
Yeah, it started with episode 1, and that's my whole thing here. And so thank you for helping bring your hopeful thoughts and perspective of today's program. As we always like to do, we like to thank you out there, the listener, for watching what we bring to you today, because we're here literally to bring you hopeful thoughts and perspectives on the good deeds of other people. And as a Texas where I call home, I'm happy to have met Riggs here. And so I'd urge you to check out his podcast, thetruecrimereporter.com, available where podcasts are downloaded. And guess what's also available? The Comeback Podcast, this very thing. Yes. We're filming here in December, and you'll see this in January. So go ahead and do the click, follow, like, share, and all that sort of other stuff. Thanks again for joining, folks, and thanks again, Robert, for the great discussion. And we'll see you next time on the Comeback Podcast.